Within the automotive world, so much is contained within this word. Rebadging is something that many companies do, while virtually all automakers practice part sharing between unrelated models. General Motors is often considered the king of rebadging. GM will take one car, say the Chevy Equinox. This basic SUV will then be rebadged as the near-luxury Buick Envision, the proper luxury XT5, and finally rebadged again as the GMC Acadia. In addition to having the same car sold under different brands with different model names, GM will also have numerous trim levels for each model, convoluting the selection even further. But as confusing as this can be, rebadging often makes sense when jumping from Honda to Acura or Toyota to Lexus. There's a clear difference between the Equinox and XT5, and personally I think rebadging is acceptable and even beneficial in a scenario like this. Rebadging cuts production costs, making both, or in GM's case, every version of the platform cheaper to produce and ultimately cheaper for the end consumer. However, automakers have to be careful with rebadging for a few reasons. Number one, it can reduce the exclusivity associated with luxury vehicles. For example, a luxury car shopper might prefer to buy a 3 Series over a TLX because the 3 Series is its own car, while the TLX can be seen as nothing more than a rebadged Accord. Another major reason is cannibalization. Using the Accord and TLX as an example, the non-luxury Accord can be optioned up to where it is close in price and features to the luxury TLX. Buyers who don't care about the brand name will typically opt for the slightly cheaper and better overall value option amongst the two. Automakers have to keep cannibalization in mind when deciding how many models can be created off of the same platform and body panels. Going back to GM, and with these risks in mind, one brand sticks out amongst the others as being utterly redundant, yet it's still around after over 110 years. So why does GMC exist? To understand why GM keeps this rugged, workhorse-oriented, yet at times luxurious brand around, we'll go back to the beginning. The story starts at the beginning of the 20th century when brothers Max and Morris Grabowski founded the Rapid Motor Vehicle Company in Pontiac, Michigan. But the Grabowskis weren't starting just another streetcar company. They started off building one-ton trucks with utility clearly in focus. The Grabowskis developed a solid foundation of branding and manufacturing during the first decade of the 1900s, and in 1909 sold the business to GM founder William Durant. This isn't a trail into unnecessary background info. This history shows that GMC has always been first and foremost a truck company, and as GM would put it, professional grade. Following the GM takeover, GMC would produce heavier duty trucks and accomplish feats such as completing cross-country road trips encumbered by heavy loads in less than a week, which was impressive at the time. In the First World War, despite William Durant's anti-war beliefs, 90% of GMC trucks were in military use. Following this era, light-duty trucks started to become commonplace in agricultural and construction industries. GM took advantage of this trend by selling both Chevrolet and GMC pickup trucks. GMC trucks were aimed more at tradesmen for professional use, i.e. fleet sales. Chevy pickups were aimed more at private buyers. At the time, that was small farmers and those who needed a truck to use on their land, although now the average Chevy buyer is an upper middle class dad. Into the 90s and 2000s, GMC started to offer more in the way of family vehicles, although these vehicles were still sold as being more functional and utility-oriented. In 1998, GMC officially changed its branding on its vehicles from GMC Truck to just GMC, signaling the rise of GMC SUVs for the future. Also in 1998, GMC released the Envoy, a rebadged Trailblazer, and sold it as a GMC SUV. That is a family SUV that is still rugged and purely functional. At the time, in GM's own words, the goal was to create a brand that projected, quote, physical power and outdoor activity. The following year, in 1999, GMC offered the Denali trim level for the first time. It was on the Yukon. This coincided with the debut of the Escalade as well. And in 2007, GMC made the switch to unibody SUVs with the release of the Acadia. That'll sort of bring us to the modern era of GMC. And with that understanding of the history and positioning of the brand, let's take a look at some of the reasons why GM should consider discontinuing GMC. The main reason is fairly obvious. GMC vehicles are very similar to the Chevrolet offerings, posing a risk of cannibalization and inefficiency between the two brands. About half of GMC's unit sales come from the Sierra, and it does seem like GM could pare down the models and trim levels to offer just one truck nameplate with different trim levels to target different markets, as especially at the base level, the Sierra and Silverado are very similar, and I think a lot of buyers view them as the same exact truck. The Silverado also costs less for GM to produce, and GM makes a higher nominal profit on every Silverado than on every Sierra. If every Sierra buyer would just buy a Silverado instead, GM would theoretically make more money. Also, with the Buick brand, GM has started cutting down on models that aren't selling well, and perhaps GM would be better off doing the same with GMC to slowly reduce the lineup to either keep it very small or ultimately get rid of it. GMC's sales have also fallen 4 of the past 6 years, not including 2022, and overall, many GM buyers might just be confused by these slight distinctions between GMC models and Chevy trucks and SUVs, which could lead to sort of the main problem with rebadging, which is cannibalization. So it definitely seems that there are some reasons GM should seriously take a look at the future of the GMC brand. But what are some reasons that GM isn't so quick to do so? If there's one thing to look at, it's the money. Right now, GM is highly profitable, something that can't be said about every company and conglomerate. Because of this, there's surely less pressure on trying to thin out operations. But also, trucks are a huge driver of this profitability, Chevy or GMC, and both Chevy and GMC trucks are respectively doing pretty well. I mentioned a slump in GMC sales earlier, but a lot of this can be explained away given world events over the past few years and current supply chain issues that are still affecting production. As long as GMC, or at least GM as a whole, is profitable, GMC is most likely here to stay. Another reason is GMC buyers aren't guaranteed to buy Chevys. GM has learned this lesson in the past, and one brand to take a look at is Oldsmobile. Some percentage of GMC buyers are just that. They are fans of GMC, not GM and not Chevy. While that might not make sense to everyone, I have a feeling that GM thinks that those people comprise a significant percentage of GMC buyers, especially GMC truck buyers. GM observed this with die-hard Oldsmobile fans. Once the Oldsmobile brand was discontinued, the majority of those buyers were upset and left the GM family entirely. With competition in the half-ton truck market being so fierce, GM wouldn't want to cancel the Sierra and assume that those sales are guaranteed to transfer to the Silverado. The same can be said for all other GMC models. The reason I went over the history of the brand is to showcase the image that GMC has built up over the past century. While GMC models are just rebadged Chevys to some, to GMC buyers, they are incredibly niche vehicles that come with an image of ruggedness and utility that's hard to find with other family SUVs. Canceling these models might do nothing but drive GMC customers to look elsewhere at models like the Land Rover Defender or Ford Bronco when they're unable to find something comparable in the GM lineup. No matter what these people would decide to do, the fear is that they would no longer be GM customers. While GMC is very niche, it's also highly valued by buyers within the niche. The last thing that's important to mention is that GM has contracts with dealerships to provide GMC vehicles. While we can't typically see the details of such contracts, we can go back to the cancellation of Oldsmobile. When GM pulled the brand in 2004, GM had to pay billions in total after dealerships sued it for this breach of contract. This ended up being more expensive than keeping Oldsmobile around a little longer, and is an often overlooked factor that set up GM for bankruptcy going into the recession. There are dealerships that bring in a lot of money on GMC models, and they would come after GM if it were to cancel GMC. So that's why GMC still exists. At the end of the day, it really is the only professional, commercial-grade branded company that people can buy from without a CDL, and this niche makes a lot of money for GM. Let me know your thoughts on the GMC brand. Do you think GM should keep it or kill it? Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.